Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Well, welcome, everyone. It is Sunday, September the 12th, 2021. It is currently 3:57 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the empty sanctuary of Victory Baptist Church, located right here in Ovalo, Texas. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening to us live, as always, feel free to add your thoughts and opinions. Anyone at any time can email me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. newsif@yahoo.com. newsif@yahoo.com. I always do my very best to respond. Sometimes I may be a little late in getting back to you. Sometimes people will send me emails maybe on a Saturday or a Sunday, and sometimes there'll be a delay. Remember, Saturday and Sunday, I'm usually very busy. Obviously, with Sunday, I'm extremely busy because I'm here in the morning, afternoon. I'm at the church pretty much a good portion of the day. So if there's ever a delay, if you ever email me and I don't respond, if it's been a couple of days, feel free to just email me back and go, hey, I don't know if you missed this. It's perfectly okay. It doesn't bother me in any way, shape, or form. But typically, I will always try to respond as quickly as I can. One of the reasons I try to respond almost ASAP is because I know if I wait, then there's going to be more emails, and then I'll be behind, and then I may never catch back up. Sometimes I respond, and then I never hear anything back from anyone. So then I'm like, oh, well, okay, I don't know what that was. If I do respond and I answer a question, you can at least let me know, hey, thank you very much. I got that. I appreciate it. Just so that I know you did receive my reply. Sometimes when I'm there's silence on the way back, I'm like, okay, I hope they got that. Did I say something wrong? So it's always hard to know sometimes in those cases because I try to keep up with everything. But definitely, because this morning someone said, hey, this person asked me a question. I told them to email you. I think they emailed you. And I'm like, well, if they did, I don't currently see it in my inbox. But always feel free to email me back if I missed it, because I never want to miss anything. All right. But what we're going to do now is I feel like that I need to finish this today, because if I don't, there's going to be probably who knows what else is going to be to talk about and try to work on the rest of this week. We need to get back to the imitation of Christ. There's always so many other things that we're working on. So I feel like that I need to try to at least discuss this today, but who knows? Depending on responses, questions, disagreements, it may be something we need to work on all week, which is perfectly okay. But I at least wanted to get back to it this afternoon because this morning I had very limited time. So a listener emailed me an article with this title, The 6-Way Fracturing of Evangelicalism. The 6-way fracturing of evangelicalism. Evangelicalism is fracturing in 6 different ways, is kind of the way. There's a lot of different ways we could take the headline and kind of take it in different directions. But evangelicalism is fracturing. Now, if you remember correctly, early this morning, I gave you the definition of a fracture: the cracking or breaking of a hard object or material. Break or cause to break. Break or cause to break. There's a breaking. The stone is fractured. The church has been fractured. It's breaking apart. And if you remember correctly this morning, I told you that in some ways the church has always been fracturing. If you can go all the way back to the early church, go back to the first 7 ecumenical councils, we can go on. There was fracturing. There was some form of fracturing. The great schism between the East and the West. There's always been these kind of fracturing. Clearly, in most of those cases, it was happening along theological differences. Now, you could talk about the merging of the church and state. Okay, there's a lot of different things we could talk about. But obviously, after the Protestant Reformation, the church fractured into a million different ways. It fractured all kinds of different groups, everyone with their own theology, their own doctrine. And we've talked about the unintended consequences of the Protestant Reformation. But again, most of the time, those divisions, that fracturing was because of theology, because of interpretation of the Bible. It was along those lines. But in the more modern times, especially over the last few years, we are seeing a fracturing of the church that I think has very little to do with doctrine and theology, even though some wants to claim to. To me, the fracturing is occurring because the church is being more influenced by the culture than the church is influencing the culture, which is always the problem of the church. Again, people are more influenced by the culture than they are Scripture. And if Christians want to argue that, they can argue all day, but just all the statistics demonstrate that. Christians don't spend that much time reading their Bible. They don't spend that much time studying. They don't spend that much time listening to sermons. So where is their influence coming from? It's coming from the culture. And guess what always happens? The church copies the culture in some way, shape, or form. Well, the culture right now is fracturing in a million different ways, and that fracturing of the culture has entered inside the church, and the church is now fracturing and breaking apart in very specific ways. So this article talks about the 6-way fracturing of evangelicalism. Now, if you remember this morning, this is what I was going to say before I did that very quick review, is I had very limited time this morning. I got here a little later than I wanted to, so it was a little after 9 by the time I got everything hooked up. And of course, I think the first person arrived at the church this morning about 9:40 a.m. So that means I have to be done and ready to go. I can't be sitting here at the back of the sanctuary and people are walking in going, and I'm looking at it, I'm going, shh. Be quiet, be quiet. I know you're at church. You got to listen to me do a podcast episode. No, obviously I don't want to be doing a podcast episode when people walk in. So I had limited time. So we did not get to take the discussion very far. Obviously, I've not had a lot of emails in regards to anything that was said. So this hasn't really had a chance to breathe. I haven't had a chance to get reaction. So we really haven't been able to have a discussion yet. So what I'm going to do is just take this article, try to move us all the way to the conclusion of it. Then we'll see what people have to say and get your thoughts and your perspective on what's going on in the Christian church today, September the 12th, 2021. Where is the church today? I've been talking about the church has been distracted, the political hijacking of the church, how the church has failed many of the tests thrown at it. And so this goes very much in line with many of the things I have said, but they're describing it as a fracturing. I've described it in different ways, but I think in some ways we're saying the same thing. But let's see what they have to say here, right? So I'm going to start back from the beginning. All right. The article begins by naming 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different things. Some of these include like multiple names, but 7 very important things that's happened in the culture. All right. First one, Colin Kaepernick, football player, refuses stands for the national anthem. He kneels, boom, becomes a cultural firestorm. Everyone's divided. Everyone's got their own opinion. Everyone's yelling and screaming over it. Make them stand. Don't make, spoiled rich person who won't stand for the national. This is disgusting. I'm never going to watch the NFL again. And all the yelling and screaming. Division, fracturing of the American people. Fractured, divided. It's over. If you think about it, and I'll just throw this in. I didn't mention this morning. Today is September the 12th. I didn't even think about it. Today is September the 12th. Now, September the 12th, 2001, you could argue at that on September the 12th, 2001, America was probably the most unified it's ever been, at least in my lifetime. And we're never going to get back to that unity. We were unified, and then you could trace the history of where everything began to fracture. September the 11th happened. There's the attacks. It brought great unity. Everyone was unified. America, USA, USA, USA. It was this great time of unity, patriotism, and then things slowly begin to fall apart. And you can try to find the thing that started it. There's so many issues we could talk about from a historical perspective. But that unity is gone. And now the country is more divided than it has been in my lifetime. I say in my lifetime. Obviously, I can't say forever because we had a civil war here in the United States of America, okay? So That was pretty divided. People were very divided in the 1960s, right? Now, I guess they were somewhat unified at Woodstock, right? Woodstock was this time of great unity. However, the people not at Woodstock were like, they're just those juvenile, dope smoking hippies are destroying our country. So there was a lot of division. Obviously, the protest over the Vietnam War, massive amounts of division. So the country was very divided. You could think of other times where maybe we kind of moved back to unity, but we are very, very divided right now. Very, 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 very divided. And Colin Kaepernick is just one of those things that shows the division. Grab them by the, I cannot say the word, something that President Trump, before he was president, was recorded saying on a bus. And it's talking about grabbing women in an area which we will not name, okay? Especially the way he named it, okay? Grab them by the. That was a very divisive time because you even had Christians saying, don't worry about that. That's something he said before. It doesn't matter now. And then others were like, what are you talking about? That's sexist. That's literally, basically supporting sexual assault. This is crazy. And the church was kind of like, no, we could go through everything that happened there. But again, a time of fracturing. Confederate monuments. Now, we have some who listen to us who live in Tennessee, right? There are those who listen who, I'm trying to think of all the different states, but pretty much every state is represented. Clearly, every state is represented. The people from different states are going to have very different opinions about Confederate monuments, right? Some believe they need to be there to preserve history. Some people believe that they represent and celebrate and honor a history that we should be ashamed of and embarrassed about. They need to be brought down. Fracturing, division. And when all of these things are happening in the culture, the church and this is always the issue, are we going to speak biblical, godly wisdom to the situation, or are we going to simply speak the culture back to the culture? Not like, in other words, in some cases, we're only speaking basically, sometimes the church, all it's doing is speaking a political perspective back to the culture. It's not presenting anything new or unique. It's like, that always disturbs me. When I turn on Christian radio and they're talking about an issue, Colin Kaepernick, grab them by the, again, what Trump said, Confederate monuments. Sometimes when I turn on Christian radio and they're talking about these issues, I don't hear a biblical worldview. I don't hear biblical wisdom. I don't hear spiritual wisdom. What I hear is, that sounds like Glenn Beck. That sounds like Rush Limbaugh. I mean, Rush Limbaugh is no longer with us. That sounds like Mark Levin. That sounds like Sean Hannity. That sounds like Tucker Carlson. That sounds like Alex Jones. And I'm like, wait a minute. Where is the biblical perspective? Where is the Christian perspective? And that demonstrates where the influence is coming from. And so then we just put forth one part of the fractured America back to the fractured America, demonstrating that the church is just as fractured as society, where we should be the ones going, wait a minute, we're not Republicans, we're not Democrats, we're not liberal, we're not conservative, we don't hold to those labels. We're followers of Christ. We're disciples of Jesus Christ. Here is the biblical perspective, but sometimes I don't hear that. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, if I can say his name correctly, Ahmaud Arbery. Now, these are African Americans who were killed tragically, horrible video of, not of Breonna Taylor, but of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery video. Just horrible situations. Now, again, the church reflected the same fracturing in American culture inside the church. COVID, serious problem or overblown? Again, the church, just as fractured as society. I don't hear from the church godly biblical wisdom in the time of a pandemic filled with compassion and placing other people before ourselves. The same selfish, condescending, conspiratorial madness that's in society is just as much as present in the church. Trump, Biden, other, or abstain. January the 6th, 2021, the Capitol riots. It's been crazy. And again, you could throw in critical race theory. I could throw in a number of other things. Whatever the issue is, the church, in many cases, shows the same fracturing inside the church that's outside the church, once again demonstrating that what's influencing the church more is not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, not Paul, not Galatians, Ephesians, Hebrews, not the Bible, but Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, Rachel Maddow, whatever, politics, ideology, philosophy of the culture. The mindset of the culture has become the mindset of the church. And once you see that, then the church is useless. If all we can do is parrot back what the world is saying, but then throw in a couple of Bible verses to try to throw a spiritual touch on it, we're not light and salt. Like, if all we're going to do is parrot back what the culture is saying, all we are become parrots for the culture. Hey, I can tune into Fox News, or I can listen to Christian radio. I can listen to those who watch Fox News, or I can talk to some Christians. It's the same thing. Where's the biblical perspective? Where's biblical wisdom? Where's wisdom that comes from above? Not wisdom that is earthly, fleshly, and devilish. Where is spiritual wisdom? But the church is being influenced, and the fracturing in the culture is fracturing inside the church building. All right, this article goes on to say, I know I'm doing a lot of review here, but I want to put this all together. The last few years have highlighted major differences in how Americans have processed the same cultural moments. Every month seems to bring another national Rorschach test. Now, the Rorschach test, remember, is basically the ink blot test, where they show you, a little card with an ink blot on it, and you're like, they say, what is this picture? What do you see? I see a spider, I see a moth, I see a butterfly, whatever. And then, of course, they then can interpret that to mean whatever. Okay, and so every month we have a national Rorschach test. In other words, every month something happens in the culture, and it's basically, okay, Christians, I'm going to use this test for the church. Hey, Christians, I'm holding up a daily Bible study guide, but I'm believing it's a card from the Rorschach test, right? Here you go. Look, what do you see? What do you see? Now, Christians, you would think, would have a very radically different perspective in what they see. But sometimes you hold up that card and you're like, okay, so you see what Tucker Carlson sees. Okay, you see what Sean Hannity sees. Okay, you see what Fox News. Oh, you see what MSNBC said. You see what CNN sees. You see what Democrats see. And it's like, okay, never mind. Just forget you, church. You're irrelevant now. You offer nothing more than what the culture is already offering me. So just leave me alone. I don't need you. Just be quiet. You're useless. And that's where the church has become. We're just parrots. We just wait for, okay, I'm going to watch Tucker Carlson tonight. Now, this is what, and sometimes when I listen to Christian radio, it sounds like that's all they do. They listen to Tucker Carlson the night before, and the next morning, their program is Tucker Carlson. Throw in maybe a little bit of Christianese, and I'm like, you're not. We should not see the Rorschach test. We should not see the ink blot the same way unbelievers see it. End of story. All right. Unlike the Rorschach test, these national events are not always neutral blobs of cultural ink. That's definitely the case. The same rending of fabric of America is happening, maybe not so quietly, within the evangelical world or within evangelicalism. I regularly hear from about 6 dozen pastors from around the United States. Over the past year, each of them have expressed to me that they are exhausted, and I've yet to hear from a single one of them that they are thriving. When drilling down on these things, much of the exhaustion revolves around what we have all been feeling deep down and objectively observing. Evangelicalism is fracturing. Many pastors are just like, I'm exhausted. I'm done dealing with this. And I have felt that. The COVID situation. Oh, I am so tired of it. It is insane. I can turn on this microphone. If I say anything about COVID, if I was just to turn on the microphone and go, all right, currently, this is how many people are in the United States or in United States hospitals who have tested positive for COVID. Here's how many people who have died. I'll get you. No, that's not true. That's not true. Nobody would be in the hospital if they were taking, this drug or this drug, if they were doing, and it's like, it's just, you can't talk about it. You can't even try to offer a thoughtful, careful, spiritual analysis. No. You better pick a side, buddy. You better pick a side. I'm like, well, how about this? I'm not on your side. I'm not on your side. I want to be on the side of truth and scripture, not on your political affiliation. Not on which YouTube video you got your medical advice from. Okay? I can't remember how many emails I got when I did the thing about ivermectin, and everybody lost their minds, completely missing the point I was trying to make. People are like, I don't trust pharmaceutical companies. And I was like, but if I remember correctly, ivermectin is made by Merck, which I think is the 4th largest pharmaceutical company, I think, in the world. So you don't trust the pharmaceutical companies to get the vaccine, but you trust the pharmaceutical companies that make ivermectin. I think I got your logic. And it's just like, it doesn't matter. It's just a lack of thought. It's just insane what happens when people start discussing these issues. They go on to say, they go on to quote the president and CEO of Christianity Today, who reads this: new fractures are forming within the American evangelical movement, fractures that do not run along the usual regional, denominational, ethnic, or political lines. Couples, families, friends, and congregations, once united in their commitment to Christ, are now dividing over seemingly irreconcilable views of the world. What used to bring us together, we were unified with Christ. Forget being unified with Christ. Now we're dividing over irreconcilable views of the world. And we've seen this. Oh, you didn't vote for Trump? You're probably not a believer. You don't vote Republican? I question your salvation. What in the world? What in the world? I won't go into long details, but I'll just give you an example. This is how divided we are. Someone who works for Grace to You, John MacArthur's ministry, posts something about celebrities doing viral videos where they're singing the words to Imagine by John Lennon. He makes a comment about the song. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I think maybe you're not being fair with the interpretation of the lyrics. I think what John Lennon was trying to say is, can you imagine a world where all the things that divide us were just magically gone and we would be unified? Wouldn't it? And so he just starts naming things that divide people. Politics, religion. You can't say religions don't divide. Religion doesn't divide people. People have been divided over religion forever. If we didn't have this idea of heaven or hell. Now, I'm not saying I agree with the philosophy, but he wasn't really trying to make a theological standpoint as much as he was simply trying to think of all the things that divide. If those things were not there, we'd be all unified. Now, I don't believe that's the solution, because I believe that what ultimately divides us is human depravity, but I think we just have to be fair. And next thing you know, the person attacked me. That basically, challenging my spirituality, my theology, even attacked our church, because our doctrine, our statement in our church says that we are committed to the in-depth teaching of Scripture. And he basically said, I doubt that that's true. I doubt that your church is committed to the in-depth teaching of Scripture, doctrine, theology, and church history when you are saying these things about the song by John Lennon. I'm like, I'm not saying anything about the song other than you're misrepresenting it. And I'm like, well, here are interviews with John Lennon explaining it. You're not being fair. But no, all of a sudden, my church wasn't spiritual and I wasn't spiritual, simply because I called into question what I believe was a misinterpretation of a very famous song that I have read. I've watched documentaries about, read interviews about, read articles about, but didn't even take the chance to hear me out. Well, okay, that's interesting. What are you trying? No. You're not spiritual. And it's like, all because you're mad because some celebrities have gone viral because of the song Imagine. You're that upset over that. Really? So now spirituality is determined in how we interpret the lyrics of Imagine by John Lennon. Real? That's how crazy it has become in our culture. And now families are being divided over irreconcilable views of the world. In fact, they are not merely dividing, but becoming incomprehensible one to another. In other words, it's incomprehensible to someone that I could listen to Imagine by John Lennon, which I'm not a fan of the song musically. I'm not even lyrically, I think it's interesting what he's trying to do. I'm not a big fan. I mean, there's far better John Lennon songs. If we want to go through the, John Lennon discography and take apart all of his solo albums versus, the work he did with the Beatles. I mean, if you want to talk music, I'm more than capable of having an intelligent conversation about it. But that's what always happens to me. I hate that. I'll just try to correct someone's misinterpretation of something, and the next thing you know, like, you're a fan of it. You support it. I'm like, no, I'm not supporting it or a fan of it. I'm just trying to correct maybe your mishandling of it. But it was incomprehensible that I would even call into question, because what I'm supposed to do is like, you're right. These Hollywood liberals and their nonsense quoting John Lennon, bunch of pagans, bunch of liberals, bunch of and I'm like, well, how about I'm just like, oh, they think that this song is important in a time where the country is so divided. I can understand that sentiment. I can understand that. I'm tired of the division. And religion clearly is not bringing anyone together. I can understand why they would sing that lyric. I can understand that. Makes sense to me. No, how dare you? It's incomprehensible to someone that someone could have a different view. What has happened to the church? The fracturing we are experiencing is likely to be irrevocable, or I always want to say irreversible, but irrevocable, as the historical ties that bind have eroded beyond repair. The reality is that while many in the evangelical movement thought their bonds were primarily or exclusively theological or missional, many of those bonds were actually political, cultural, and socioeconomic. Now that is I want you to hear this again. The reality is that while many in the evangelical movement thought their bonds, what brought us together, what we were bound together with, were primarily or exclusively theological or missional. We thought that our bonds were theological and missional. We have the same theology. We have the same mission. Glorify God, the Great Commission. But the reality is many of those bonds were actually political bonds, cultural, and socioeconomic. That really what bound us together wasn't theology. It was politics, it was culture, and it was socioeconomic. That's an interesting claim. These political, cultural, and socioeconomic differences have always been there beneath the waterline, but what has occurred in the last 5 to 10 years has been the extent to which those values are expressed has been exposed. So he's saying there's always been some of these divisions there under the surface, but we focused more on the theology, the mission, following Christ, not our theological differences. But over the last 5 to 10 years, the expression of our politic, the expression of our cultural values, the expression of our socioeconomic identity has now become taking the preeminence over our theology, over Bible, over Christ, and now the fracturing of the church is occurring along those lines. I think there's some truth to that. With the expression louder and the exposing more visible, these divergent values have rapidly created substantive wedges between various subgroups. All right, so now that it's becoming louder and seen more, now divergent values are creating substantive wedges between various subgroups. The rate at which divergent views have been revealed has created jarring relational dissonance. People in the pews are left questioning the extent to which their unity is based on the apostles or Nicene creeds or other political, cultural, and socioeconomic matters. They are left questioning where churches, ministries, and organizations land on these things. Now, that's really where it comes down to. Now, where do you land on COVID? Where do you land on politics? That now your spiritual identity is more identified not by the creed, not by your confession of faith, not by your hermeneutic, not by your doctrine or your theology or your systematic theology. No, or your biblical theology. Now your identity is, where do you stand on cultural and political issues? How do you believe? Do you believe Romans 13 says we should submit to this, government that's, persecuting us by giving us money? Okay, I'm being a little facetious there, but churches receiving millions and millions of dollars of PPP loan from the government to help you maintain your church even in the middle of a pandemic, and even if you can't have in-person services, but then yet scream that you're being persecuted. Okay, the nonsense the church does. But now it's like, where do you stand on Romans 13? All right. In other words, you better believe that means you don't have to submit to the government. So the real question is not Romans 13. The real question is, do you believe we need to submit to the government in these areas? Well, if you do, then you're not a Christian, and I'm not going to follow you. Where do you stand with vote Trump or no vote Trump, or Republicans or whatever? And now that's really that's where it's come down to. It's not your creed. It's not your theology. It's these cultural issues. Because cultural issues are now more important than anything else. And that's where the church has become. They go on to say, the tectonic plates are shifting underfoot. Right now, if you're a Christian, the tectonic plates are shifting under your feet. You may not realize it, but it is. This fracturing will likely be irrevocable, not because our gospel essentials are not unifying enough, but because the divergence of ethical priorities, cultural engagement, radical attitudes, political visions and illusions, and their implications for philosophy of ministry mean that unity is fundamentally no longer tenable. So they're saying that it's no longer, unity is no longer something we can attain to. We can no longer, it's no longer, we have no ability to get it. Because these other issues are now have taken the preeminence. They've taken the priority. And so there's no way to ever be unified again. The only way to be unified again is we got to get back to the Bible alone, doctrine, theology, and being the church. But the church has become simply an extension of people's cultural and political identities. And the church now must reflect their cultural and political identities and their cultural and political views. They don't care about the doctrine and theology as long as the doctrine and theology will support their political and cultural views. And if the church doesn't support their cultural and political views, then the church is deemed heretical. The church's orthodoxy is determined by its politic, not its interpretation of Scripture. Now, this is what they have to say. The 6 categories. As I have surveyed the evangelical landscape and discussed with pastors all around the country, evangelicalism seems to be fracturing into at least 6 different subgroups. 3 of these groups, 1 through 3, still have at least some connectivity to evangelicalism, and the other 3 have cut ties completely. So they're saying that the church has fractured into 6 categories. 6 categories, right? 3 have a connection to evangelicalism. 3 have cut all ties and are completely gone from it. Here we go. Number 1. Neo-fundamentalist evangelical. The first group is the neo-fundamentalist evangelical. Neo-fundamentalists are those who have deep concerns about both political and theological liberalism. There is some overlap with Christian nationalism, a syncretism of right-wing nationalism and Christianity. But neo-fundamentalists do so with more theological vocabulary and rationality. Concerning threats within the church, they have deep worries with the church's drift towards liberalism and the way secular ideologies are finding homes in the church. Outside the church, they are concerned about the cultural's increasing hostility to Christianity, most prominently from mass media, social media, and the government. So neo-fundamentalist evangelical. These are people who have deep concerns about political and theological liberalism, and there is an overlap with Christian nationalism. So this is, I call neo-fundamentalist evangelical, I call this the politically hijacked church. And the politically hijacked church more to the right. Okay, we'll call neo-fundamentalist evangelical the right right-wing, politically hijacked church. Yes, they'll talk the Bible. Yes, they'll talk Jesus. Yes, they'll talk theology, but it's also going to be this, we got to stop the liberals. We got to fix this. We got to fix this liberal take over the world. The country's falling apart. We got to win it back to Jesus. And it's going to be this mixture of theology with right-wing politics. It's going to be, we got to fight for our rights, Second Amendment. We got to worry about the Constitution. We got to do this. We got to get these people elected. And it's just weird mixture of Christianity with right-wing politics. The neo-fundamentalist evangelical is the right-wing Republican politically hijacked church. Oh, yes, there'll still be talk of Bible. Yes, there'll be still talk of theology. But man alive, what you're going to hear from there over and over is going to sound like it comes from Fox News. It's going to sound like it comes from Tucker Carlson. Over and over and over and over and over again. And it's going to be like, what in the world is this? All right. They call it the neo-fundamentalist evangelical. I call this the right-wing, the Republican politically hijacked church. Again, they're going to use a lot of theological language. They will quote the Bible, but it's going to be this mixture with Christian nationalism, patriotism, country, Constitution, Bible. It's going to be the Bible. They're going to be pro-gun, pro-war, yet somehow pro-life. Okay, it's going to be a lot of mixture of a lot of weird things. All right, that is the neo-evangelicalism or the neo-fundamentalist evangelicals, the way they classify it. I'm going to call it the right-wing politically hijacked church. Next, mainstream evangelical. Mainstream evangelical is historically the term has been Protestants who hold to the Bebbington quadrilateral of conversionism, activism, biblicalism, and I'm not even going to try to say that. The emphasis for this group is the fulfillment of the Great Commission. All right. The Bebbington quadrilateral of conversionism. All right. Cruciacentrism. There we go. Cruciacentrism. So they're using a lot of words here that we would have to work on. I'm going to try to simplify this. Concerning threats within the church, they share some concern for the secular right's influence on Christianity, including the destructive pull of Christian nationalism, but are far more concerned about the secular left's influence and the desire to assimilate since the world still remains so hostile. Outside the church, they are likely uncomfortable with the rhetoric from Trump and other conservatives use, but they view this discretion as a lesser of two evils. All right, so let's try to put this one together. All right, this one where they throw in a lot of terms and they don't do a lot of defining. All right. So the Bebbington quadrilateral, the Bebbington quadrilateral. I've got to look at this. I've got to look this up really quick. All right. I want to use their terms, but I'm going to try to simplify this one here. Okay. So let me look this up. Okay. The Bebbington quadrilateral of conversionism. It's literally right here, all in a sentence. And they mix this together. Okay, here we go. What in the world here? What is this? Okay. This is interesting. This comes from a paper. They put a lot of these words together. All right, Bebbington quadrilateral, a definition of evangelicalism, and I guess Bebbington quadrilateral is the one defining this kind of evangelicalism. All right, and they use the word biblicism, conversionism, crucicentrism, and activism. Biblicalism, all essential spiritual truth can be found on its pages. Conversionism, the belief that human beings need to be converted. Crucicentrism, a focus on the atoning work of Jesus on the cross. All right. So I guess the crucifixion of Christ is to be central here, I guess the way they're using this term. Activism, the belief that the gospel needs to be expressed in effort. All right, then they go into a historical overview here of some of this. So this is interesting. If you type in, you can do a little research here if you want. If you type in, so David W. Bebbington is where this comes from. The Bebbington quadrilateral comes from David W. Bebbington. All right, and I guess he's the one who kind of lays out his definition of evangelicalism. So David Babington is the one that would kind of bring about this stream of evangelicalism. All right, I'm trying to clean this up a little bit. So they call this the mainstream evangelical. So the mainstream evangelical is the one that would follow Babington's quadrilateral of conversionism, activism, biblicalism, and crucicentrism, if I can read the word correctly, crucicentrism. So in other words, quadrilateral. Now I see what's going on. Babington is the name of the person. Quadrilateral is the idea of the four kind of parts that defined evangelicalism, and this is conversionism, activism, biblicalism, and the crucicentrism. All right, those are the four parts to it. Now, that's a lot to unpack, I know, but that's okay. It caught me off guard when I saw the Bebbington quadrilateral. I'm like, what in the world? Once I saw the name, once I looked it up, I'm like, okay, now. So what they should have said is mainstream evangelical. This is how they should have done it. Just for clarification purposes for the average person reading this. Historically, this term has been Protestants who hold to Bebbington's definition of an evangelical. See how much easier that is? And Bebbington gave four things to describe an evangelical. Someone who holds to the idea that everyone needs to be converted. Activism, all right? Biblicalism, that the truth and what we need is found in the pages of Scripture, and the crucifixion of Christ is central. So that's the mainstream evangelical who goes with Bebbington's definition of an evangelical. That's what they're trying to say here, right? The emphasis that when I saw Bebbington quadrilateral, it threw me completely off. I was like, what in the world? Okay, but now it all makes sense. Now it makes sense. So let me say it again. So number one, they believe the first group here, we're gonna label it as the right-wing Republican politically hijacked church that mixes theology with Christian nationalism. The second church is the mainstream evangelical. This is the church that defines evangelical according to Bebbington's definition. And in his definition, he gives four characteristics or attributes of it. Conversionism, everyone needs to be converted. Now, I do need to look at something here. I need to find out his definition of activism. Activism is the belief that the gospel needs to be expressed in effort. So activism is that we need to express the gospel in our efforts. Okay, so here's Bebbington again. Conversionism, everyone needs to be converted. Activism, we need to express the gospel in our efforts. Biblicalism, that the Bible contains the truth that we need on its pages. And crucicentrism is the idea that the crucifixion is central to what we do and what we teach. All right? That's the definition here. Now, he goes on to say the emphasis for this group is on the fulfillment of the Great Commission. Concerning threats within the church, they share some concerns for the secular right's influence on Christianity, including the destructive pull of Christian nationalism, but are far more concerned about the secular's left influence and the desire to assimilate, since the world still remains so hostile. Outside the church, they're very uncomfortable with the rhetoric that, say, Trump would give, or other conservatives, but view the direction as the lesser of two evils. So mainstream evangelical is the kind of evangelical that tries to be somewhat in the middle here, right? Now, I think typically what the mainstream evangelical, this is the way I'm going to define this, all right? The number one is the right-wing politically hijacked church, right? That's what number one is, the right-wing politically. The mainstream evangelical, let's call them the evangelical who just wants to get along, right? They don't necessarily want to be pro-Trump, but they don't necessarily want to be against Trump. They just kind of want to be in the middle and not get caught up in a lot of these fights. So in many cases, they don't really want to take a side. And I think in many cases, they're then just viewed as almost irrelevant because everyone has taken sides. I will say mainstream evangelicalism usually is very weak on theology, very weak doctrinally, and their preaching tends to be very shallow. This is just kind of your mainstream, middle-of-the-road church, doesn't want to offend anyone, doesn't want to make anyone mad, not very theological, not very doctrinal, not very deep exegesis of Scripture, and pretty much are going to try to stay away from touching any of the major cultural issues. They're going to try to stay away from it and not touch it because they don't want to get caught up in the midst of it. All right? So we'll have the right-wing church. We'll call it the right-wing hijack church, the mainstream evangelical church that just kind of wants to stay out of all of this. And there you have it. Then the third one, right? Wow. That Bebington quadrilateral, that just threw me off so much. I was like, wait, what? The Bebington quadrilateral, what in the world? And then when I saw the name, I'm like, oh, okay. And the only reason I knew the name is I got a book sitting right up there at the front of the church on the history of fundamentalism, and it draws the distinction between fundamentalism and evangelicalism, and I'm almost positive Bebington's definition is listed in that book, but I can almost guarantee you they don't use it. They don't call it Bebington quadrilateral. I am almost positive they don't. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think someone emailed me something and mentioned Bebington quadrilateral. Maybe they did. Now I'm thinking, why didn't I recognize this here? But I was completely confused here for a second. All right, so there's that one. Number 3. That took a long time. I apologize. Neo-evangelical. Neo-evangelical are people who would see themselves as global evangelicals and are doctrinally evangelicals with some philosophy and ministry differences. But they no longer use the term evangelical in some circumstances in the American context, as the term, as an identifier, has evolved to be more political than theological. Within the church, they are highly concerned about conservative Christianity's acceptance of Trump and failure to engage on topics of race and sexuality in helpful ways. But they have not totally abandoned evangelical identification and likely still labor in churches with the broadest spectrum of these groups. Outside of the church, the group feels largely homeless in today's world. There is equal concern or slightly more, either way, depending on the person, at the threat the left and the right poses to Christians seeking to live peacefully and quiet lives in all godliness. This is the neo-evangelical. The neo-evangelical is really the group of people kind of like, I think they're homeless everywhere. They're homeless. They don't fit in anywhere. They don't really fit in the culture. And sadly, they definitely don't fit in the neo-fundamentalist group. They don't fit in the right-wing hijack church. The mainstream evangelical church, they don't fit in there because they do want to talk about some of these issues. They do want to say, well, what do we do with the racism and these horrible things that's happened? What do we do with our racist past? They do want to talk about some of these issues. Now, sometimes the neo-evangelicals will be labeled as woke or liberal by the right-wing church. So, in other words, the neo-evangelical is not going to fit in with the right-wing hijack church because they're going to be viewed as liberal, and they're going to be viewed as woke, and they're going to be viewed as a problem. They're not going to fit in the mainstream evangelical church because the mainstream evangelical church is not going to deal with some of the issues they think they need to be dealt with. In many cases, the neo-evangelical may actually care a little bit more about theology and doctrine than the mainstream evangelical world will. So they kind of find themselves homeless. Not only they don't fit in the culture, they don't fit in the right-wing church, they don't fit in the mainstream church. They're just kind of out there. All right, you see the fracturing? We got one going far to the right, one that kind of wants to just stay out of it, but they play down doctrine theology. So they just kind of become more of a social Jesus club. And then the neo-evangelical, they're kind of the ones that are like, they don't belong anywhere. They may not accept everything on the left. They don't accept everything in the right, but they want more than the mainstream evangelical church is going to give them. They're kind of like the homeless group. So you've got the right-wing one, you got the mainstream, and you got the neo-evangelical. And yes, the neo-evangelical at times, let's be honest, the neo-evangelical at times is going to be more politically hijacked by the left. So the neo-evangelical may not be completely hijacked by the left, but they're probably going to be more influenced by the left than they are the right. Okay? Right? Next, number 4, post-evangelical. Post-evangelical are people who have fully left evangelicalism and self-identification standpoint, from a self-identification standpoint, and reject the evangelical label, yet are still churched and likely still agree with the Apostles' and Nicene Creed. They are more deconstructed than neo-evangelicals, and they are more vocal in their critique of the ones, the twos, and the threes. In other words, this group is going to be very critical of the right-wing church, the middle of the road evangelicals, and the neo-evangelicals. They're going to be critical of all of them. These are the post-evangelical. I don't even want to be called an evangelical. Now, I tend to find myself in the post-evangelical camp because I hate the term evangelical completely. I don't like it. I stay out of it because the evangelicalism, if you go through the history of modern-day Christianity, there was the split between the fundamentalists and the evangelicals. And I believe the evangelicals were the ones who didn't want doctrinal distinctives and didn't want to fight and wanted to get along with everyone, and they led to a lot of compromise in the church. So I don't like the evangelical word. So I would stay more over with the fundamentalist world. But then you got those that are more fundamentalistic who are part of the evangelical world. Yeah, it becomes very confusing in following all of this. All right? Some remain firmly in Protestant circles, and others have crossed over to mainline Catholic or Orthodox traditions while still holding to the basic creeds. Concerning threats within the church, they are focused on abuse, corruption, hypocrisy, Christian nationalism, and the secular right. Outside the church, they're primarily concerned with matters of injustice, inequity, the secular right, and a lesser extent to the radical secular left. Many fours are fours also because their experience with predominantly white evangelicalism have been so difficult and strained that physical distance seemed to be the only conclusion. All right? So the post-evangelical, they don't want anything to do with the evangelical church. Now, I think the problem is their division leaves out all of those. I think they kind of want to group some fundamentalist into with some of these branches of evangelicalism. But remember, within the fundamentalist world has always distanced itself from the evangelical world. All right? I want to make that very clear. As someone who's been a part of fundamentalist churches and fundamentalist seminaries and fundamentalist Bible colleges and Bible institutes, they're always like, no, we are against the evangelical church. We are against it. We deny that their compromise. So this is grouping some of those fundamentalists in group one into the evangelical world, and I think that that's wrong. I don't think that's accurate. I think that's incorrect to do so. All right? So there's the post-evangelical. So many of them, they don't want to be called an evangelical. They still are in Protestant circles. Many go to Catholic or Orthodox, and they're worried about corruption and hypocrisy within the church. They're worried about Christian nationalism, and they're worried about the secular right. They're worried about the political right hijacking the church. Outside the church, they are concerned with matters of injustice, inequity, and the secular right. And to the less extent, the radical left. Now, again, remember, the post-evangelical is going to be viewed as woke and liberal by the right. by the politically hijacked right church, they're going to view the post-evangelical as woke, liberal, and ungodly and probably not saved. Because again, the division is so great. Now they go on to say this. There is likely a halfway point between 4 and 5, known as ex-evangelicals, all right? Ex-evangelicals. They don't neatly fit in either number 4, post-evangelical, or number 5, which we're going to read in a minute. This group is difficult to parse as the meaning that this group has taken on has evolved even this year. We do not want to exclude this group from the typology, but given the evolving nature, we're hesitant to pin it down too precisely at this juncture. Some of these folks have actually de-churched, some have deconverted, yet some remain in the faith but are quite vocal on their critique of the movement. In time, this category might evolve and swallow up category 5 below, or it might fizzle like other labels. So number 5 is known as ex-evangelicals. Ex-evangelicals. They're just like, I'm done with all of this. We're fed up with all of it. Sometimes I feel like I'm an ex-evangelical because in many cases I don't fit into the fundamentalist world because the fundamentalist world has been politically hijacked basically by the right. So I don't fit in there. I don't fit in a very liberal church. I'm not going to go into a liberal church that's got a gay pride flag out front and all, like one of the Lutheran denominations just put as bishop a transgender. I know I don't fit in those kind of churches. So where do I fit in? I don't know. Maybe within the post-evangelical, maybe the neo-evangelical. I definitely don't fit into mainstream evangelical, and I don't even like the term evangelical. So maybe I'm somewhere in between that 4 and 5. I don't know. Ex-evangelical, I don't know. I think a lot of Christians don't even know where they fit in anymore because it's so fractured. Here's number 5. De-churched, but with some Jesus. Here are people who have left the church but still holds to at least some Orthodox Christian beliefs. The de-churched are the people, that's it, I'm done with the church, but I still believe in Jesus, I still believe in the Bible, I still believe in doctrine and theology, but I'm done with the church. I've left the church. There are a lot of people out there who have left the church, but they still are very much trying to be committed to Christ and live out their Christian life, but they're fed up with the church. I think there's a lot of people in that de-churched group. And then number 6, the de-churched and deconverted. These are people who have left the church and are completely deconverted with nothing left of Christian beliefs. They're like, they no longer claim to be a Christian. They're done. Now, you've got to put them in the fracturing of the church because these are people who were within the church who now are deconverting, deconstructing, de-churched. They're done. They're gone. All right? We're going to have to stop there. Oh, wow. This article goes on and on and on. I do apologize. I do sincerely apologize that the Bebington quadrilateral of conversionism, activism, biblicalism, and cruciacentrism completely messed me up there. I was like, what in the world? I just saw mainstream evangelical. I'm like, okay, I know mainstream evangelicalism. And I'm like, what in the world? So the Bebington, I'll just bring this up to you. David Bebington, he was born July the 25th, 1949. His main interest was the history of evangelicalism. Is he still alive? I believe he's still alive. Yeah, he's still alive, as far as I know. Okay, here's okay. I just looked this up. Bebington quadrilateral. Bebington is widely known for his definition of evangelicalism, referred to as the Bebington quadrilateral, which was first provided in his 1989 classic study, Evangelicalism and Modern Britain, a history from the 1730s to the 1980s. Bebington identifies 4 main qualities which are to be used in defining evangelical convictions. That's biblicalism, cruciacentrism or centrism, conversionism, and activism. All right, so there you have it. And that's called the Bebington quadrilateral. There we go. I apologize. That threw me completely off in there. because they had not, what's weird in the article, they don't go into that, like, maybe the other ones are not that well defined, but this one, they refer to it. Again, they could have just said, David W. Bebbington defined evangelicalism by identifying 4 attributes of 4 characteristics. Those are the Bible, the crucifixion, the conversion, and activism, and making the gospel the focus. I mean, you could have said that so many ways, but I understand since the Bebbington Quadrilateral is out there, I can understand then that's why you would make a reference to it. So there you have it. That's a lot to process. I know that is a lot to process. This article goes much deeper. Again, you can find, I don't know where you can find the article. I'm assuming if you do a Google search, The 6-Way Fracturing of Evangelicalism. It was published on June the 7th, 2021. It comes from a website called mereorthodoxy.com. It was written by Skylar Flowers, written with Skylar Flowers. The main author is Michael Graham. There you have it. Now, there's a lot there to process. I don't know which group you find yourself in. I don't even know if you know how to identify yourself. I don't know if you even know how to identify your church. Where is your church? Now, here's the problem. They gave us 6 groups. Really, they gave us 7 in a way, the ex-evangelical group. So they really gave us 7. But I think if you look at your church may not even fit perfectly in one of those categories. I don't even know how to identify my church. We're definitely not in the mainstream evangelical world. We definitely are not in the right-wing politically hijacked one, guaranteed. We're definitely not over into the group that would be influenced by the left political group. So we don't fit in there. We're kind of like in that group which we're homeless. We don't fit in anywhere. So that means most people who walk into our church are going to walk out because they're going to disagree with us on something. We're going to make someone mad. And I've been doing that in a roundabout way my whole Christian life, but now everything is so divided that it stands out even more. All right, there you have it. I apologize again for messing that up, but I was just like, all the other ones were so easy. It's just like, and then I'm like, wait, what? Bebbington Quadrilateral. And and the article doesn't even define what it is. So from a reading perspective, the author should say the Bebbington Quadrilateral is a definition of evangelicalism that can be traced back to David Bebbington, and it was published in 89, 90, 98, whenever it was, and give you some idea. I don't even think do they have a footnote? Give me a second here. Is there even a footnote here to it? No. There's no footnote, nothing. It's just historically the term mainstream evangelical. Historically, this term has been Protestants who hold to the Bebbington Quadrilateral of conservatism, conversionism, I should say, activism, biblicalism, and crucificentrism. So it doesn't even. Yeah, it's just like out of the blue, boom, out of nowhere. I'm like, wait, what in the world? And so I had to really start, I know in the middle of live on the air trying to process it all of a sudden. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, let me look this up. And then it all started coming to me. And so there you go. All right. I'm going to stop right there. You can email me your thoughts, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. All right. Hopefully that was beneficial. I hope it was. But I look forward to your discussion and where you think the Christianity is right now. And we'll talk more about this one. We're going to have to come back to this at least one more time and clean this up and hopefully put it all back together and be beneficial. All right, everyone have a great evening. God bless.